And we're live. So this is Brave New History. We're here with Gnostic Quran, and we're talking about possible Manichean origins for
Of
Islam and missionary
course.
activity.
I-
Absolute certainty of Manichean origins for Islam. Maybe we'll go
Well,
with that.
in my perspective, 70%. Like, of
There we
course,
go.
there is some sort of a resistance
Yeah.
in academia. As far as I know, the only person who touched on this subject was Amir Ali Moisi. Despite his name, he is a French historian in the early about the origins of Islam, and he's a great specialist in the early Shia traditions. And I found about him almost recently, like 3 months ago or something. Some Shia in chat sent him me was what the hell? I was looking for such guy for a year. Why the Google algorithms didn't bring his up, but most probably because most of his books written in French. But even he is on this kind of a skeptical, more gentle position that Islam may originated from something which probably had in common with Manichaeism, with such some sort of a pre-Manichaean Judeo-Nazarene group, whatever the hell it might be. And this is just a big thing in French critical scholarship, that Islam originated from this Judeo-Nazarenes. And but from my perspective, the biggest argument in favor of Manichaeism comparing to the Judeo-Nazarenes is the whole controversy between Mani himself and this Alkazite group, at least from what we know from the Coptic sources, and partly from Greek Colony Codex, which unveiled certain theological debates happening between the Mani and this baptismal community. And Mani, in a sense, was a reformator because he was fed up with this constant baptismal rituals. For whatever reason, maybe some angel came up, this divine twin of him, whispered him that it's a big no-no. And there was a debate, and most probably what we're dealing with, that originally these Alkazites had some sort of animistic beliefs about the animalistic and the plant nature, that they possess some sort of a soul or spirit which you cannot harm. That's why they were strict vegetarians in that sense. But Mani goes even further, that not only plants and living beings, living animals, but also water. And there's actually big some sort of a connection of this famous Gnostic Borborite movement with a certain or specific Manichean sects. It well may be that these two names is just two reference for identical movement, and Borborite is, as far as I know, strictly translated, covered in mud. Why is that? Because most probably some Manichaeans weren't washing it themselves, considering it this kind of a vile act, aggressive act against the nature, in that case, water. But I think that was just more or less polemical device of Mani to get rid of this continuous ritualistic tradition. And what we have in Islam, we don't have any baptismal rituals. what we have, exactly like in less moderate Manicheanism, that you just need to like wash yourself before the prayer. And as far as I know, there's no traces of mikvahs, as baptismal baths among the Arabs, and from broader archaeological and epigraphical evidence, we don't have anything in the Arabia, in northern Arabia, and even in Arabic communities in Mesopotamia. And certainly we don't have any traces of that in the text of the Quran itself. So that would be, I think, the strongest argument in favor of actually Manichean origin and not Judeo-Nazarene origin, because you would expect to see some strong relevance of baptismal rites. But just talk about some counter-arguments for this whole French dilemma, I call it, because from my perspective, well, I have a little bit about the Nazarenes, whilst we have a lot about the Manicheans and how this religion is still under the big shadow. It's almost, you think that there is some I don't know, conspiracy theory going on. Let's not promote that or something like that, because the evidence is clear. And today I just wanted to talk of some evidence about the missionary activity of Manicheans among the Arabs, and there is some hints towards that. Of course, there's the hints towards the presence of some weird Gnostic forms of Christianity or in Arabia. But broadly speaking, Manicheanism, unfortunately, as a religion, remained an unexplored subject. And probably the biggest problem is, of course, this kind of identification of Manicheanism as some sort of tradition, but deeply rooted in Zoroastrianism. And maybe it's have some relevance if we look only into the findings in Turfan, what is called Turfan Manichean manuscript tradition, which originally was found in the Buddhist caves, by the way. And many concepts in this particular locality, particular geographical locality, corresponds with Zoroastrianism undoubtedly. Like, for example, the Christian father figure is identified with Zurvan, and Zurvan was used by other Zoroastrian movements like Zurvanites. But to be honest, even this pater or father was broadly used by the Greek pagans, right? And it was the title for the Zeus. But let's not digress into this murky waters. What I wanted to say, that can we actually just generalize on the basis of one Manichean tradition towards the whole lot of probably tradition which were the Manichean ones, and the one in the Egypt, most definitely Syriac Manicheanism, traces of which just vanished out of the history. And that's very suspicious, because Manicheanism was a very literal phenomenon. Mani himself was so boastful about that he was actually the first to write down the Gospels. And as far as I know, I think that was some sort of a combating technique against the Marcion, that canon itself started being written down during this particular time. And most probably there were different claimants, and Manicheans was just one of them.
Yeah, so if we can derail it a little bit, were Mani and Marcion were contemporaries?
They weren't, as far as I know. Yeah, they weren't. Marcion was Okay, let me check, like for just certainty. But as far as I know,
Yeah,
they weren't. But certainly, some Marcionites during the time of Mani would claim some apostolic succession, right? How's it called? Yeah, it's uh, pretty much not contemporaries. Yeah, they're like 50 years apart. And
yeah. And it's interesting how each of the caliphs, there's record of them saying that they're the first to write down the Quran. And we have that tradition here where Marcion commits the
uh,
gospel to paper, and then Mani is the first, right? Everyone is the first, right?
yeah,
Marcion is the first, and then Mani is the first.
it's
Um,
obvious, like it's in every religion you look up, like it's the most ancient one, certainly. But yeah, what is interesting, this kind of a claim for the authority, because I think that even this imperialization, let's call it like that, of Christianity, it's actually started with the Marcionism and with the Manicheanism, from my perspective, because it's the earliest evidence we have for the canon itself. Maybe there was like oral tradition, broadly speaking, which wasn't so popular, I guess, comparing to what kind of a pagan mess the whole Roman world was. And certainly some Christian community rightfully preserved it, or maybe not so rightfully, or well, human memory is not the best instrument to begin with. But even in Manichaeism, you will see the emergence of hadith, this type of a literature where you have this chain of transmission, which basically testifies the apostolic succession to the person of the prophet. In the case of Manichaeism, Jesus, obviously. And later on, it would be adopted, from my perspective, in Islam, in the Hadith tradition, but you can already see it even in some Jewish scriptural traditions. In Talmud, this a reality of the Torah, a strict distinction between the written Torah and the oral Torah. And that's a big controversy in Judaism too, right? There's the Karaites who denies the oral Torah, and having wonderful debates with rabbinical Jews. I highly recommend that for the Muslims, first and foremost, in order to understand how similar such debates with the modern debates about the Hadith authority. And yeah, but there was certainly some innovation in all of this Hadith sciences. At least they tried to give some, I don't know, some confirmation of that, of the chains itself, that whether they were contemporaries, whether they were living in the same city, was it possible? But mostly just unfortunately, like bunch of books about the slander, like how this person in the past had a dementia at the old age, so he's not reliable. He's naive certainly. And in the Manichaeism was important for the authority itself. But I digressed. I was discussing that we can certainly say that, well, all Manichaeism were like in Turfan. It's just wrong, because even this particular Eastern, let's call it Eastern Rite Manichaeans, had a tight context with the Buddhism, and certainly there was some inner influence in between them. How to trace it, how to separate it from Middle East Manichaeism. And yeah, and as far as the Coptic tradition goes, it's quite different from the Turfanic one in terms of theology. But let's talk about the Manicheans and Arabs. The connection between Manicheans and Arabs can be traced in one of the Syriac legends about the Adai, and this is according to the Syriac Orthodoxy, one of the disciples of Jesus. But there was like 12, and there's additional 70, and he was like part of this much broader followers, which in itself such a mystery, right? Where the all this 12th fetish begins with, and you can see it also in Manicheanism. That Mani would appoint 12 apostles too, following footsteps of Jesus, and certainly you will see the same in the Imami Shiism, where there will be 12 imams, 12 appointed by God. And in Imamism, to be honest, they weren't in a sort of a divine status, but in more esoteric Shiism, they would identify it with the Mahdis. So it would be just reincarnation of the same paracletic figure, right? And that was important too for the Manichaeism, the whole idea of the paraclete, that there is some sort of a guiding spirit which never leaves the community without the sort of a word of God. Yeah, and this whole story about the Adai, Adai was basically some sort of a postman of Jesus who would bring the letters back and forth to the king Abgar of Edessa. And they would correspond with each other. I mean, this king, Edessan king, and the Jesus, the king would ask him to heal him. He would have some sort of a disease. Jesus would refuse. There was some sort of a missionary letters from Jesus. But many modern scholars have questioned actual Syriac Orthodox origin of the story. And some of them proposed an idea of appropriation of the original Manichean account. This assumption is based primarily on the phonetic resemblance of this Adai figure in this particular Syriac tradition. And one of the apostles of Mani was called Mar Ada, and who is mentioned like everywhere, almost. That's fascinating. That you will find him in Turfan manuscripts, you will find him in the Coptic ones. In some Syriac traditions, you will find him. From heresiological reports, obviously, because what we have from Syriac Manichaeans writes is like almost 2 or 3 manuscripts which are like severely damaged, and 2 of them is just the quotation of Peshitta Paul, or at least something similar to Peshitta. As far as I know, it's not word for word. And one is just straight away damaged. It's some sort of a preaching towards the certain catechumens. What is interesting in this particular manuscript, and I checked up, I spent almost a day trying to find anything about Syriac Manichaean documents, and it was published like in the early 20th century by and I don't remember name, of course, by someone. In the book itself called the Explanation of Religion of Manichaeans or something like that. But it's written in English. It was an English scholar, a British scholar, excuse me. And what fascinated that in one line of the manuscript you will find the Muslimuna, which which corresponds to the Muslim, broader Quranic terminology, let's call it. Well, the manuscript is damaged, is irreconstructible what was meant there, but because even in Syriac, this Muslim can mean the heretic Muslim from Syriac point of view, right, from this kind of orthodoxy and Nestorianism. But it can also mean someone perfect, something healthy. Even in colloquial Arabic, you will see that Muslim can mean that. Yeah, but the story of Adai, it was mentioned everywhere, and who defended the idea of Manichean provenance of the Syriac story was a German lexicographer, Walter Bauer. He himself thought that Marcionites, Bardeisonites, and Manicheans were the majority back at the day in the first century in Edessa. And you cannot trace with certainty any activity of the so-called Syriac Oriental Orthodoxy. And he assumed that from observing the Ephraim the Syrian, which is like the church saint, church father, at least for the Eastern Orthodoxy, and as far as I know, even for Catholicism. That he wrote that heretics in the Edessa, they called this Orthodox groups, meaning him and his brethren, the pollutions. And what Walter Bauer proposed that, well, he assumed that in Edessa there was just a small minority of this orthodoxy which would just circle around one person, this pollute, unknown who, basically, because we don't know who was this guy. There's some controversial stances, might be Paul of Samosata, but that's, I think, a little bit too much. And he thought that the legend was basically invented by the later Syriac Orthodoxy in order to make this initially minority sect within the Edessan community majority one, to some sort of make it the oldest original Christianity in this city, in the Edessa. Yeah, and that actually can be traced as correspondence between Adai and this Mar Adai in one Syriac chronicle, where this Mar Adai actually called Adai, this Manichean, and this chronicle called Karka Dbeth Sloch, and Karka is just a Syriac for the Arabic Kirkuk, or vice versa. Arabic just was adopted from Syriac, this original name, and Kirkuk was like a big pain in terms of the whole situation with the ISIS, because there was a raids of ISIS on the Kirkuk. Yeah, and in this chronicle, the Manichean missionary Adai and the second person, Abdazakia, became active in the Edessa in the middle of the 3rd century. Such name like Abdazakia not in any case point out to the sort of a post-Islamic origins of this particular chronicle, because, well, many such names appears in the early Syriac sources in what is called martyrdom lists, where there will be just a list of Syriac Nestorian martyrs. And for example, the names Abdallah, Abdaisha, meaning the similar what we have in the Quran as Abdullah, the servant of God, or Abdaisha, servant of Jesus, or Abd Zakiya, servant of Pure One, are already found in the martyr lists, which dated like in the early 5th century with certainty. And of course, there's a lot of even the Safayitic epigraphy in Jordan, Abdallahs like everywhere there, and Abd Allahs too. not only servant of God, but servant of goddesses. Because Allat is just a feminine form. Yeah, and that would further improve the original Walter Bauer argument, I think. That it might be just a made-up story by the late Orthodoxy. And what is interesting, even in Armenian sources, this King Abgar was identified being Armenian. Like, it's so ridiculous because the Abgarid dynasty was Arab. It's quite evident by certain surnames which would appear in such dynasty, like Bakru, which is like pure Arabic in origins, and later on you would have this whole Bakruail tribe. So this kind of a presence of Arabs in the northern Syria, I think, is just under investigated. So much Christian conflating sources, which just taken as at a face value. It's all this basically folkloric stories. Yeah, another important document attesting the presence of Manichean missionary activity among the Arabs is the anti-Manichean tracts of Titus of Bosra. And Bosra stands for the city of Busra originally. It's just a Greco-Latin rendition of this city. And the city itself was laid over the Nabatean city of Hauran, because there would be wars, Persian-Roman wars. When Romans would conquer the land, they would just rename it, right? And Nabatea was renamed after the successful war of Emperor Trajan into the Arabia Petrea. It's kind of a northern Arabia. And the capital was renamed into Bosra from original Hauran. And Bosra was like a major capital, at least at the time when Titus wrote his anti-Manichean tract, which testifies the presence of Manicheans. Obviously, why would he wrote the letter to Arabia refuting Manicheans? Because there was a Manicheans missionaries. Yeah, I'm just looking to my scribbles that there's also interesting heretical Christian currents were present in Arabia, and you can already trace it in Panarion. And Panarion is just a heresiological treatise of the early church father Epiphanius of Cyprus, or Samaris, as he also known by this name. And in notable heresies is also example of Orianism, which was interesting because they were into anthropomorphic depiction of God. And you can already see it in the early Abbasid sources with the Hanbalis, because it's basically Hanbali belief that you need literally interpret certain passages in the Old Testament when it comes to the hand of God, and so on and so forth. Also, the anti-Decomarian sect or movement, whatever the term you would like to use, because sect is more like negative one. It was Arabian Christian movement which refused to accept the virginity of Mary, the doctrine of virginity of Mary. And they believed that actually Jesus was just a son of Joseph out of the marriage between Mary and the Joseph himself. I've seen some people argued for this position even for Quran, but the problematic part, of course, would be like, why Isa ibn Maryam? Like, why would you make this kind of ibn Maryam? It's already like kind of presupposes that, well, he's son of Mary, not son of Joseph, and it's almost certainly was something unusual, right? Why would you put the mother lineage into your name instead of father lineage, which was the normativity? But even during this later Arabic, what can I remember is the famous theologian, like the idol of the Salafis, Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah stems from his mother, Taymiyyah. It's not actually father name. So I don't know, maybe there was some certain trends in Arabia too, but I can't confirm it, at least for this particular period. But what's interesting in this Epiphanius, that he mentioned that, and he almost like boasts that this filthy heretic Manes was refuted by the Archelaus. And that actually points out to the famous, well-known work Acts of Archelaus. And there's a different provenance theories about whether it comes from, and I think the most convincing one was brought by the Stephen Hewler, who think that we're most probably dealing with a anti-Manichean Marcionite treatise. Yeah, despite both being Gnostic, but I myself highly disagree that Marcionites were Gnostic in any sense. Marcionites weren't into the secret knowledge, quite evidently. Most probably salvation in Marcionism was through martyrdom. That was like the basis. And despite being called Gnostics, they were like rivalries, without a doubt. Voluntary martyrdom is an interesting topic, I guess, because you can trace it in some early Muslim, what is called gravestones, right? When they would just put up some stuff that, I was killed on jihad, like I strive for jihad, a lot of stuff like that, at least in northern Africa. Maybe there's some Marcionite connection to this voluntary martyrdom, but I think if there is the problem in the Quran, that would be question of this martyrdom, because some passages in the Quran seems to imply that martyrdom is a good thing, that you must strive for it, but some, they would be in favor of this kind of classic Gnostic attitude, that why the hell you would even like think about that? What later would be rebranded as taqiyya, that if you want to save your life, like, dude, like, without a doubt, just lie about your belief. And that's, I think that's, if there's a biggest problem you can bring about the Quranic theology being inconsistent, that would be this particular topic. But Acts of Archelaus, anti-Manichean treatise. What is interesting that in this intriguing document, one of the forerunners of Manichean doctrine is identified being a Saracen. It's called Saracenus Sethianus, to be more proper. And Acts of Archelaus made him Mani's ancestor and sort of a propagandist in the Upper Egypt. And that actually pretty interesting, because there was a presence of Manicheans in Egypt later on. That's why we have this Coptic Kephalia, which was like literally found in the monastery right in the center of the Egypt. Like it's in a desert of deserts, like, which is interesting, because in order to get to this particular oasis, I don't know what is the correct pronunciation, oasis, I think, right? You need to pass by the Nag Hammadi, basically. And Nag Hammadi is, we know how it was important for the whole Gnostic studies. And the Gospel of Thomas was found in Nag Hammadi library, and Manicheans were using it everywhere. Yeah, but that's quite interesting, that Saracenus. Of course, you can say that Saracenus is a big debate, right? Whether it's just a synonym referring to the Arabs, or Greeks were using it like a more general term for the broader nomadic public. Because obviously Arabs weren't the only nomads back at the time. There were Scythians, there were Medes, like this kind of a proto-Kurdish people, right? And there were certainly Turks too. I mean, maybe small communities, but as far as I know, what was this book? Now I won't remember that, but there was some book elaborating that there was some presence of Turkish tribes in the Middle East, pre-Islam. Yeah, but maybe they were just using the Saracens as a broader term, like, and the Saracens might well be some Scythian or Persian, so it's not conclusive. Another account confirming the presence of Manicheans is the Palestinian Chronicle of Cyril of Scythopolis, another Eastern Orthodoxy venerated figure. And that's very interesting because according to the document, there was a certain monk, saint called Eusebius, and he basically went into the Judean wilderness. The document called Desert of Ziph. And this desert, it just like a little bit to the west of the Dead Sea. There was the Saracens again, whether it was Arabs, whether it was nomadic Persian, maybe nomadic Jews, who knows? Because it's basically Israel today. And he converted them into the Orthodox belief from Manicheanism. They were Manicheans. The documents basically reads that some people of Ziph, who had formerly adopted the heresy called Aftermania, renounced the impure heresy as a result of his inspired teaching, and teaching of this monk Eusebius, declaring anathema to Manes. That's, I think, the very important document because it rightfully connect, at least geographically, Manicheanism to this Dead Sea Scrolls sect. More direct evidence of emergence of Manichean communities among the Arabs is the letter of Mani himself. And there was different letters, different, he would just basically cosplay the Apostle Paul, that you need to send letters everywhere to every different communities. And one of these communities was a province of Hatta, which most of the scholars taking as a transliteration of Arabic al-Khat. And later on in Muslim sources, it would be used to designate a coastal area between Amman, today Amman, and Bahrain. It's like the basic coast of the, western coast of the Persian Gulf. Yeah, and the letter attested in Middle Persian manuscript in the Turfan that basically stated that the letter was sent to the Hatta. It's very important witness to the activity of Manicheans because it's most likely was sent during the time of the Mani himself, during the immediate apostolic figures within the Manichean church. The strongest testimony, I think, which can support the connection between the Arabs and the Manicheans is the batch of Coptic Manichean manuscripts again in what was found in the Kephalia. In one of the batches, there was a leaflet with a historical content. It was just basically history books. And in several places of the codex is proper names quoted, among which of those is the Queen of Thadamor, which also known as Queen Zenobia, famous Arabic queen. And in Arabic, you can simply pronounce her name as Zainab. And another issue, right, about the historicity of Muhammad, why suddenly the Zainab appear later on in the Muslim sources. But it may be just the name itself was very popular because how popular Queen itself was. And yeah, quite different from this kind of a traditional understanding of Arabic culture originally being harsh, patriarchal, like what the hell is woman ruling the kingdoms. And another name, King Amaro, was mentioned in this document. And the German Orientalist and Manichaeologist Hans Heinrich Scheider immediately recognized that this King Amaro is just a Coptic transcription of the Arabic name of the king of the Hira, Amr ibn Adi. And this king was also attested in other in another Manichean document, but another testimony for the existence of this king would be a famous Paikuli inscription written in Middle Persian, which was found in Iraqi Kurdistan. And it basically says that there's sort of a list of kings of different subjects of Sasanians, and one of the subjects was the Lakhmid kingdom, this Persianite or Persian-aligned Arabic kingdom back in the day, Banu Lahm. And Amr was basically the king of the Lakhmids. And what is interesting that later on in Muslim sources, you will find that presence of Manicheans in Hira is also confirmed. Because, well, in the Coptic material, he's basically this King Amr is like best guy. He like helped us. He gave us a shelter. So he was the patron of Manichaeanism. And that guy lived in basically in the early 4th century. So already in the early 4th century, there's most probably some Manichean community in the Hira. And Hira today is the Kufa, city of Kufa, major Shia pilgrimage center. Yeah, and Muslim source testifying the presence of Manicheans is Hisham ibn al-Kalbi. He was an authority on the pre-Islamic religious customs, so he would be wrote, and there would be certain literature, type of literature about this kind of pre-Islamic past. And what he mentioned that some Zanadaka, which in early Abbasid period was just a term for the Manicheans, and Manichean religion was practiced by some members of the tribe of Quraysh, which is the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad himself. And of course, such information should certainly not be taken at the face value, but there at least there's a collaboration with this 4th century documents that there was a presence of Manicheans. And most probably, yeah, it's just later in my scribbles that most probably they originated there in Hira in the early 4th century. And it's important because often in later Muslim tradition, there would be some sort of a rivalry relationship between this Zenobia and Amr, this first caliph, or first, I don't know, Amir of Banu Lahm. And even as far as I know, in some histories that Queen Zenobia was responsible for the death of the Amr. So they, later Muslim historians, would portray that there was some sort of enmity between that. But this inscription, in fact, would testify that these two principalities were in political, commercial, and cultural relationship between each other. Well, maybe there was some beefs, but can we take this later Muslim historiography about this almost like a drama between Zainab and Amr as a reliable source? Maybe it was important for the historiographers to portray the enmity in order to kind of eliminate any traces of Manicheanism in Hira. Possible. But yeah, wouldn't be surprising that Arabic king would be in alliance with the Arabic queen, like tight kingship between blood-related dynasties was a norm in antiquity. Like, come on. Yeah, and in last, what I wanted to say at last, that unfortunately Manichean Syriac documents are almost completely missing until maybe they would found later on, which arises great suspicion. Because why on earth, like, have a Turfan, man, like a lot of Middle Persian stuff in the Turkish language, Manichean one, in Greek, Latin refutations of Manicheans. Well, of course, that's a biased source, but nevertheless, the source about the Manichean. Greek, Coptic, some Syriac chronicles again, from the perspective of the refutators. But original Syriac documents, almost nothing, despite this recent discovery of the seal of money, which is written in what is called Manichean Estrangela, Manichean Syriac script. And most probably this was a personal belonging of the Mani himself. That's why we can say with certainty that Mani was familiar with the Syriac. It wasn't like some Persian dude trying to infiltrate the Christianity. Almost nothing. You will wonder who and when tried so much so to ensure that this Syriac legacy of the Mani, the first seal of the prophets, by the way, didn't end up in the public domain. Yeah, and I think it's pretty much for today for my presentation.
Yeah. So one thing I was wondering, when we were talking about Hira, right? We're talking about is that related to the Hira cave?
Yes,
that...
it was the Hira cave, but Hira cave in Saudi Arabia. Don't mix it up. Hira, the city, is different from the cave. But how can we trust the 10th century sources, by the way? Because they would try to eliminate traces, right? Because if there,
so you're
there
saying
was,
that when we're talking about the Hira cave, we're talking about the city?
I think they would just try to create the new narrative that no, Muhammad wasn't associated in Hira, meaning Hira, the city in what is current day Iraq, right? Kufa. No. Hira means the cave, okay? He didn't receive revelation in Iraq. He received revelation in the oasis in the Medina, right? In Mecca, excuse me. So I think that was the case. They tried to just remove any evidences, because obviously even back at the day there would be Manicheans, most probably. From the later Arabic sources, Ibn al-Nadim is the famous bibliographer. And I mean, most of the scholars seems to agree that he's like a trustworthy dude, because he is very accurately portrays even the sects which is like which have enmity towards, because he himself was most probably Mu'tazila, and well, Hanbalis were enemies of the Mu'tazila, and he's like very accurately describes everything without the blemishes. But who knows, maybe he's lying when it comes to the Manicheans, and sometimes like very weird stuff happening with this all Hanif paradigm. As you know, that there is this idea in Islam that there was like this kind of a primordial state of the religion called Hanafi religion, Hanifiya, which was pursued by the Abraham himself. And in this Ibn al-Nadim report, Mani was called the Ahnafur Rijal, the most Hanifs among the men. So maybe this Ibn al-Nadim himself was a crypto-Manichean, who knows? But because it's very strange report. It's mostly positive. Like, it's not maybe positive, but it's neutral, very neutral, comparing to what you have from other Abbasid sources. And in other Abbasid sources, Mani is like the Antichrist figure, basically, like, because there would be a problem with the Fatimid Caliphate. And I suspect that theology of the Fatimid Caliphate was very similar to the Manichean early on. And they would attach this label that this Zindiqs, and meaning this Ismaili Shiis, they originated from this filthy heretic, and they needed to refute him in one way or another. So, yeah, I just missed what you was asking. Like,
Well, yeah. So, I mean, it was just the Hira cave and kind of where does that fit in with it? Though you wonder with Manichaeanism being so prominent, right? So with
oh, I
yeah,
remember what I wanted to say, because all of this Hanifiya stuff. So obviously Jews would be like, what the hell are you even all about? Because if we do strictly see the similar root, Semitic root, which appears in non-Arabic Semitic languages, like in Syriac and Hebrew, in Ge'ez, it means exactly the same. The pagan, Gentile, was used for the basically non-Jews, like with Goyim. This would be the most accurate translation, like nations. And some scholars pick up, well, Quran says this Hanifs, when it speaks about the Abraham, that, well, he was a Gentile, but later overcome. But to be honest, this explanation that the Quran just using it just rhetorically in the context of Abraham is just bogus. Quran uses it extensively to describe specific like point of a view of this primordial type of religion. It's not certainly Quran trying to say that Abraham originally was pagan. He was raised up being pagan. No way. Like there's almost prescriptive phrases without the context of Abraham in the Quran, which states that I created you Hanifans, something like that. What is interesting, in some Syria chronicles, you will find that Manicheans often were called Hanpe by the Syriac communities. And there is a fascinating research by the Moshe Gil about this whole Hanpe issue. I don't remember exactly what was the book, but what he tried to prove that all this Hanpe, or at least his thesis, was that Hanpe used by the orthodoxy to describe the originists, the different movements within the Christianity which followed the idea of pre-existence of souls. So basically believed in reincarnation. And Christians would call them pagans because, well, it was a prominent belief among the pagans. And that kind of association could be what Quran tried to say, that, well, Abraham believed in reincarnation. That was the pun, I think. And yeah, and what was the biggest controversy to begin with before advent of Islam? What was like the last controversy after Islam would just spread en masse in the Middle East? Controversy of the Origenists, when the Origen was condemned on the third, as far as I know, third Council of Constantinople. How is it properly called? When the beliefs and pre-existence of soul was condemned as heretical ones by the Byzantine authorities. And that, I think, what caused such harsh retribution, I would say, by this early Muslim community. And from my perspective, without a doubt, that Quran, like in early surahs, like undoubtedly there's trichotomistic anthropology, and trichotomism itself was a prominent theological position of Origen and later Origenists, that there is the tripartite distinction. There is the soul, body, spirit. And this middle one, the spirit, it goes through the cycles. That was necessary. Whilst in dichotomistic anthropology, this later two, or upper two, they were united into one. So you have body, spirit, soul, like body / spirit, soul dichotomy, basically, in which you don't have any reincarnation. Basically, there's one event which will happen at Messianic age, the Judgment Day, where you will be resurrected from your body. And that was the issue, I guess. And you will see it in Manicheanism, definitely, these ideas of reincarnation. You will definitely see it in some monophysite Christian communities at that time, right? Because obviously today monophysite church would be like, no, we don't have anything like that. But I mean, Coptic church today. And yeah, and it would explain many things why, like, this Paulicians would suddenly appear in Armenia, this Gnostic sect, which would have the similar belief, and later on Bogomils, and so on and so forth. Yeah, but as far as my recent findings, I was trying to crack up what the Muslim can mean, like what was this original distinction, because I found this manuscript in Syriac where this Muslimin appeared, and I think what the Quran tried to portray is Muslims as the perfects, and you will actually see similar distinction in Manichean community in the northern Egypt. They would distinguish, because there would be like this kind of two major groups within the community: the elects or electi and the catechumens. But oftenly this electi, they called perfects in the Manichean sources, at least Coptic one, because you won't find anything like that. Well, maybe there's some mistranslation of Middle Persian terminology, but I don't know. At least I won't found anything from my research in Turfan manuscripts. But in Coptic, it's quite a popular idea. And the catechumens, they call believers. This is a basis for the distinction which you will find in the Quran. Mu'minun, believers, and the Muslimun, the perfects. And even later on, you will find it in the famous, which may deem Gnostic sect of Cathari. They would have exactly the same distinction, believers and perfects. Can you imagine that? And of course, yeah, I'm not gonna dive deep in it because I'm not familiar with the Cathars, but I just heard many weird hypotheses that the whole project might be like made up. This all Cathar stuff, as far as I heard it from the Justin Sledge. I like watched one of his videos elaborating on this theme, and as far as I know, the mainstream position that was all basically made up. Catholics just created artificial enemy in order to justify the plunder and war in this rich lands in the France. Yeah, but yeah, I think I just I don't know what to even add. I think I quite elaborated the whole connections of Manicheans, quite possible. Of course, there's a like kind of a white space, like this kind of a gap of unknown between this 4th century and the 6th one, when Islam appears, about the Manichean community. That's why I found it very strange. I mean, you will find it in the 4th century, in the later one, in the Augustine refutation. But maybe there are some Syriac documents, I don't know, I'm not familiar with. Most of the stuff is just simply not translated, just sitting there in Syriac like some unimportant documents. Like it's hello? It's just elaboration on the church history, how Christianity originated, maybe. Nothing like, it's not important. Because wave handing, similar how the Marcion gospel is wave handed in the circles, academic circles. So yeah, that would be the weakest point. This kind of a time period. What it would be 180 years when basically no cohesive reports about the Manichean activity in Arabia, but well, we have something in the 4th century. Maybe like they survived throughout the time. It's quite possible.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, maybe we'll leave it there.
Yeah, yes, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thanks. Very interesting. We're wondering, maybe we thought we had it figured out what's happening with the word Muslim, right?
Yeah.
But maybe there's something going on with Manichaeanism there, and we'll have to
Yeah,
look more into
especially
Manichaeism.
all
Yeah.
this Aslamna stuff. You like, even if you look the context of the Quranic verse, where there's some sort of, and this appears first in this kind of a narrative of the Abraham, where the God decided basically to make them Muslimun. But there's an interesting passage in Genesis, as far as I know, where this dialogue going on between the Yahweh and the Abraham. And Yahweh says, like, dwell within me and be perfect. Maybe there's some reference to that particular passage. But in Hebrew, it was spelled tamim, which corresponded to Arabic tamam. And it's even in colloquial Arabic, you would see like something like ya salam. They would use in the same sense as tamam, like, oh, how wonderful, something like that.
Mhm.
So how perfect, if we take it more literally. Well, I think this kind of a disenchantment of the later Abbasid tradition with the biblical stuff, with the Syriac stuff. It's just, what is going on, you may wonder. So yeah, I think that's a big mystery of history.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you
And
for having me.
yep, and then everybody will need to plug your channel. Go to Gnostic Quran
Yeah,
and
I will have a pleasure to meet Dr. Robert Price, who will discuss
oh, that's great. Yeah, you got your interview coming up talking about
origins of Islam, and we will discuss his new book. As far as I was like, I contacted him because I found out there was a whole chapter about the Islam. I was like, it's good to know what Dr. Price has in his head about this whole issue.
yeah.
So that would be in the February 23rd. So check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and have a
Yeah,
great rest of the day.
yeah. Have a nice day.